Please note that this episode contains depictions and stories of siblings lost by homicide, suicide, and/or domestic violence. Some people may find these stories activating, triggering, and/or disturbing. Please see our show notes for additional resources and to understand the full content of the episode.
Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Surviving Siblings podcast. Today I have Emily Heim with me. Emily, welcome to the show.
Maya, thanks for having me.
Emily, I'm really excited to have you here. And I'm excited for you to share Peter's story, your
Yes.
story. It is obviously a sad story, but one that really needs to be told. And it's also a story of remembrance, as we've just chatted about. He was born on, I have to mention this, on Halloween.
Yep.
So, Peter, I'm jealous, but
Yeah.
I would love for you to just kick us off, Emily, and tell us a little bit about your relationship with Peter, what it was like having him as a brother, and kind of your dynamic. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so even though my brother and I had an age gap, he was born in 86, I was born in 92. We were like two peas in a pod. We were best friends. My mom had mentioned to me not too long ago and reminded me of it, like that my brother always wanted to have a little baby sister. So I was his tag along everywhere. All his friends knew me as his little tag along, as annoying as I could be. But we were just the best of friends. We did everything together. We got in trouble together. We went places together. Like, we were just the best of friends. And then my brother was the biggest hearted, most goofy guy you could ever know. He was the life of the party, the jokester. He was the guy that everybody knew. Literally, everybody knew him. Where we grew up in northern suburb of Chicago, we went to a pretty large, like our high school was pretty large, and I swear that every single person in that high school knew my brother, and everybody then subsequently knew me as Peter Heim's little sister. But he was just larger than life. I don't think there's a person on this planet that knew my brother that wouldn't describe him as the ultimate friend, the ultimate jokester, the kid that's coming around the corner being crazy. Just that guy. He was somebody that could transcend social groups and everything. So he was just a downright really cool guy. Really cool.
And that paints like such a good picture because I'm like envisioning him integrating with
Yeah.
every single type of group in high school or
Yeah.
middle school or you know what I mean? Just like any age group. That kind of person that you think of.
Super into the arts. He was an actor, but also played sports, loved music like crazy. He was an extra in a couple movies. It was, yeah, I know. Yeah. We'll have to plug those movies later. No, I'm fine. But yeah, extra in a couple movies, like a couple independent films. He was a really artsy kind of guy. And he loved that hippie mantra towards the end. And he just was like living life. He's, man, coolest dude I knew. I wish I could be as cool as him.
I'm sure he thinks that you are super cool because we
So.
think you're super cool. So definitely. No, but I know what it's like when you have a sibling and you're just like, oh my God, they're so rad. And I just, especially like that brother sister dynamic, right? Like the older brother, like was he really, I mean, he was larger than life, but was he the kind of brother that was really there for you and was protective of you? Yeah.
Super protective. Like everything I knew how to do and learned how to do, it was from him. Like I got into sports. I would play catcher as softball. Became a pretty good catcher because I was sitting there catching his fastballs, getting chucked at in the backyard and stuff like that. Wasn't as fast as him. My brother was a running son of a gun. Like he could run. He ran cross country. He played baseball. He ran track, and then he just hung out with his friends, and he was just a downright good dude. So.
Yeah, I want to hang out with Peter.
No,
Hopefully
he
you're here
was
with us right now, Peter. You sound fun.
I'm sure like any of his friends listening and all this were like, yeah, man, that was a cool dude. That's a cool guy. So.
I love that. Yeah,
I love that. Peter's a man. So that's all they always used to say.
I love that. And I think it's so important. And that's why I really love to start these episodes by really just talking about our sibling or God forbid siblings that we've lost and really understanding who they are, because that's why I switch often between the present tense and past tense, because that's who Peter is, right?
Yeah.
And painting that picture of who he is as a person, but also as a brother to you. And I just think it's so important. So
Yeah,
he
definitely.
just sounds larger, again, like you said, larger than life.
Yeah,
So
larger than life, and that was like who he was, but also too a little bit of it was now knowing what we know, like going into like how he got into opioids and everything, and we never really knew. I didn't know that he was. I knew my. I mean, who doesn't smoke weed in high school?
Right.
Who doesn't experiment with drugs in their lives? But his experimentation unfortunately led to medication, self medication.
Tell us a little bit about that, Emily, because
Yeah.
you guys have an age gap. So sometimes you're not always aware. I have this conversation a lot with my youngest sister, who's 7 years younger than Andreas, my brother, who passed.
Yeah.
And there's things that she remembers and thinking like that was a little
Yeah.
maybe not normal for him or things like that,
Yeah.
because he did struggle with that. So walk us through that and share that
Yeah.
story. Like,
So
how did he get into this? Like,
So my
yeah.
brother, he's typical firstborn pressure. My parents were trying to be good parents, and there was a lot of pressure on my brother growing up to live up to a little bit of an image and an expectation that wasn't my brother. And he, needless to say, for the better sense of the word, rebelled a lot. And there was, seeing my insight growing up now, I could definitely tell like my brother was depressed a lot, and he acted out based on that depression a lot. And I remember as young as maybe 8, when my brother was taking care of me, him drinking, and I'm 8 years old, and y'all do the math on how old he was, him drinking. And unfortunately, there is a little bit of a history of addiction that runs in my family, especially with alcoholism on my father's side. And he unfortunately caught the airs of that, and he was using drugs and alcohol for a good time to cope with the pressures of being the expectation that my parents wanted, being the expectation that he thought he should be, and coping with that. And then suffering some loss himself. A good friend of his had passed away when he was about 14 from an opioid overdose. And I remember it clear as this day. He was in his room crying, and he told me that he never ever wanted anybody to feel that type of pain. And he like promised me like as bad as he would ever get, that he would never do that. And I told him, I was like, okay. Now I'm a kid. I'm like, I have no idea what that stuff even is. Growing up, we grew up in a kind of a, like where we grew up, it wasn't terrible, but it was still like pretty rough. And you hear about people like smoking crack, smoking meth, but you never really heard about people doing heroin.
Mhm.
And that was like the first kid to, like, he was a kid, like, to die from heroin. And nobody knew what it was. They didn't talk about it in Dare. So I always had that mantra, okay, my brother might smoke some weed and do some pills, but he's never going to do that. And so I was like, okay, so as bad as he can get, he's never going to do that. Like, because like I had such a trust, like we had such a trust growing up. And I'm like, okay, we're never going to do that. And then so he felt like it was pretty tumultuous what he was feeling, especially in high school. And then my parents towards the end of their marriage, towards the divorce, it was very tumultuous in the house. Very. And my brother was skipping school because he was.
And how old was your brother when your parents, because we were talking about this before we hit record, but just so all of you guys know the dynamic, because the dynamic of the family was changing, right? So what grades were you guys in when your parents were going through divorce?
I was in 6th grade. I want to say he was going into his sophomore year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
So going into his sophomore year of high school, our parents divorced. And like, it was a blessing. The house environment was ridiculously tumultuous. And my brother, I know for a fact that he felt like he was the reason my parents were divorcing because of his behavioral issues. My brother was skipping school and stuff a lot because I'm diagnosed now with adult ADHD. And if I have ADHD, my brother had ADHD times 13.
You could see that now looking back. Yeah.
We hope you're enjoying this incredible episode of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. We'll be back in just a minute after hearing from our incredible sponsor. Are you a bereaved sibling, a forgotten mourner, or as we call it here on the Surviving Siblings podcast, a surviving sibling? Well, I am too. My name is Maya, and I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast. I created this show for siblings just like you to help you along your grief journey. And now I've created even more resources to help you along this lifelong journey. I wrote the grief guide for the surviving siblings so that you and I can travel along this journey together. Within the guide, it has prompts to help you with a validation exercise that helps you validate your feelings of grief. We also talk about the stages of grief, and we also have a timeline exercise that helps you journal as you continue along your grief journey. I share tips throughout the guide on my personal grief journey as well and what worked for me. You can find this guide on Amazon.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And of course, you can visit our incredible website, thesurvivingsiblings.com. In addition to finding the grief guide, you'll find merchandise that supports you as the surviving sibling, as well as our show. You'll also find our support group that meets every month, our Ask Me Anything Mondays, and so much more. So make sure to visit thesurvivingsiblings.com for more information, and don't forget to order your grief guide today.
My brother was as sharp as a tack. Like, he was smart, but he didn't do homework. And he didn't want to sit in class. And but that was ACT days. He got like a 39 on the ACT, and he skipped half of the ACT. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, he just didn't want to, like, school wasn't his vibe. I remember him saying that all the time. I'll go eventually. It's just not my vibe. I'm like, okay, cool. But he bared a lot of burden, and he felt my mom and my dad divorcing was his fault. And
why do you think he felt that way? Because this is a big statement, Emily, and I appreciate you being vulnerable about that. But that's a big statement, and I feel like a lot of people listening, a lot of you guys listening, may have felt this way, going through something very similar. And so it's very interesting to listen to your perspective on this. Why do you think Peter felt that way?
Mostly, my parents were two very different styles of parents. My dad was the big old kid that, like, he was like who you went to for yes all the time. And my mom, unfortunately, he put my mom in the position, unfortunately, where she was the bad guy. And, like, my mom would be like, no, this is what needs to happen. This is what needs to happen. So they butt heads a lot on my brother. And my dad would be like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And my mom's like, it's a huge deal. And they would get into arguments and things of that nature. And there were other things, of course. But that's all he heard. And that's all the repercussions that he thought were going to happen were all based off of him. Those were the arguments he heard. And so, of course, it's a big burden to bear because you hear your parents fighting about the fact that you skipped school for the 13th time this month. And that's all you hear is the yelling. And so he definitely felt he was the reason, and then that he couldn't really live up to expectations that I don't believe were ever set, but in his mind were set. Yeah, I think he thought that him not doing well academically, he wasn't meeting up to, like, my parents' expectations, which wasn't necessarily the case, but it was never really communicated.
Okay. You just hit the nail on the head here, Emily. A really big point. And I think, there's been so many beautiful things about doing this show. And one of the greatest gifts that I've received, besides, of course, all of you and coming on the show like you, Emily, are actual parents reaching out, which is so impressive to me, grandparents reaching out. And so I think this is a very strong message because lack of communication is communication, right? Not setting expectations and letting people know, hey, you know what? You're a rock star. You're social. You're this incredible human being. You're excelling at sports. This part is just not your thing, and that's okay. We're not going to put pressure on that.
Right.
That's not going to end the world, right? That's not, because I connect so much with what you're saying about Peter, not only for my brother, but for myself. My brother and I were very much alike. We did not like going to school. I skipped 86 days my senior year. How I managed to graduate and still get a scholarship is beyond me. But you're telling me this, and I'm like, I get it. I get Peter. Like, I so get him, because it's not for everybody. And my brother and I both are my brother's more ADHD. I'm more ADD, but these were things that were so stigmatized for so long. And now it's becoming more, okay, that's cool. That's not their thing. What's their thing?
Right.
And these pressures are starting to be pulled away. And that's why I think you just really hit the nail on the head by saying it wasn't really communicated, but it was communicated by not communicating it.
Right.
And it's a
Yeah.
natural thing as the oldest, because I'm the oldest of four, and you just feel like so much pressure to perform. And if your other siblings are, or you're watching other people perform in ways that are societal expectations, the weight continues to just go further and further down. And I'm the product of a divorce too. So I didn't even realize until we started connecting about all this stuff, like how much I would connect with this story, because it's true. And you start to escape at a young age. Like I started drinking at a very young age and things like that as well, because you're not taught these healthy ways to release. And it just sounds like what Peter was going through for sure.
Yeah. I mean, 1000% for sure. And there was just a lot of this really like, he put it all on his back, and he didn't need to put it on his back. And they did a lot of focusing on him because he was getting in trouble. And I was younger, so I was not really getting away with murder.
You're just under the radar,
I'm just
Emily.
like scoot. I'm just scooting. I'm not getting the best grades and everything.
Yeah.
And I'm just
But at
like
least you're
flying.
going to school.
Hey, well, here and there. But because they used to have these automated calls, and if it's only one automated call you get if one of your kids doesn't attend.
God, I
school.
remember these. Yes.
My brother would come home and he'd be like, "Hey, pick the phone up if you hear it or delete the message." Okay, I got you.
Oh my God, we are like kindred spirits. You want to know what I did? And you could never do this nowadays.
Yeah.
This is so funny.
Hold on, time out. Did you get the attendance letters?
Attendance letters?
Okay, I got a
We
story
would try
about
to go
attendance
grab those from the mailbox and get them. Yes.
Did you boil the water and try to break the seal to see if it was?
We just, anything from this school we knew was not good. Because my sister, who's a year younger than me, she wanted to show her grades off and stuff. So we tried to get to the mailbox before her, always.
And you break the seal with the boil the pot of water.
Yes. You'd steam it and then rip. Yeah. Oh my God. We did all this too. You couldn't, everything is email now. Everything is encrypted. I'm which is it's not a bad thing. These are not good things that we're telling you to do. But
yeah, I know.
I
couldn't
told the
survive
school,
as a child nowadays. Yeah.
I know, right? I'm I told the school, I changed the number from my mom's home number. And then eventually there was a cell phone that happened later in my high school years. But I put it as our fax number. So the principal used to get really mad and would be like, why? Because I'd actually come back to school and they'd be like, we've been trying to get through to your house. Why is it always busy? I'm like, my mom just really likes to talk to people. She's always I made this stuff up. I would be like, oh my God.
That's good, man.
Because
That's
I just
good.
couldn't take it.
Yeah.
I know that was a good, my friends were always like, ooh, that's a good one. I could not believe. That's probably when I should have known I was more creative than I gave myself credit for. But, oh, yeah, these were the things, guys, that you missed because I'm born the same year that Peter's born. So, I did these things that he's doing. So, oh my God, that's so funny.
Dude,
wow.
He used to tell me, get the mail when you get home. If you see a letter, go put it in my room.
I did it to my siblings, too.
And then we get the progress reports, and it was the old typewriter Scantron ones, and it'd be missed attendance days, and my parents would be like, "What? I never received a notice for this." Yeah, it's wild, but yeah. So it's just, he just put a lot of that on his back, and yeah, he just put a lot of that on his back, and it just didn't need to be there. And looking on it previous to now, my parents could have had a little bit of grace and told him. They said it, but words are words at the time, and he had his mind made up. Mm-hmm. He started getting, when my parents divorced, he went with my dad, I went with my mom, and my dad's house wasn't that far from where my mom decided to live. Literally 2 blocks over. It wasn't that far at all, but my brother's like, no, I'm going to go live with dad because I could never live with mom. And I was like, okay. And so that was very tough, and he took it very hard because we went from being together every day to not being together every day. And he didn't want to come and see my mom because my mom was always in his backside about what are you doing with school and why are you not doing this and why are you not doing that. And he was just not trying to have it. And my mom would be constantly calling my dad. And there's a lot of stuff that my mom never told me after my parents divorced. That came out later. But like my brother, he was getting so bad into drugs and alcohol that he had attempted to commit suicide by drinking a whole bottle of vodka and taking a bottle of Tylenol. And like I never knew that even happened.
How
Like,
old was Peter when he did that?
that was actually right before his overdose.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so things were going on with
Yeah.
him. That was just one. That
It
was
was
like one of the significant events. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so like I used to try and spend the weekends with my dad, like go over there on the weekends. My mom was like my mom's relationship with my dad was pretty rocky still, and so she was trying to, and not blaming my mom at all, never doing that. My mom was trying to navigate a situation as well, but their relationship was just so tumultuous, and they weren't seeing eye to eye on stuff with my brother, stuff with me, financial stuff, that like she would tell me no a lot, and so I would be like F you and go hang out. And it was a point in time where I would go and hang out, and I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with Pete. Okay, cool, go hang out with him. And it just didn't see, I was like, I couldn't put my finger on what was going on, but something wasn't right.
Because you were a couple years younger than him, and
Yeah.
so you're not in the know of all this yet, but you know your brother, and you're connected to
Yeah.
him, and you're like, the Pete I know.
Yeah. And he like had started like flaking on me like in 2005, like in the last 2004, 2005, it was his last year of high school. He was enrolled in alternative campus so he could graduate. So he was like out in the alternative campus. He was trying to work, trying to have a girlfriend, trying to do all these things. And he would flake on me a lot, and he wouldn't text me for days. And I'm like, something's going on. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but something's going on. And then I went to go visit with him one day. We went to go play video games. And like now, because I know what it looks like, my brother was stoned out of, like, he was cracked out of his mind on heroin. Like, he was just sitting there slumped over. And I was like, what? I'm like, okay, maybe he took some pills or something. And I'm just like, okay. I'm like,
Was he like,
yeah.
tell us a little bit about it. Was he not, he was slumped over? Was he able to engage you at all?
Yeah,
or
he was
he
engaging
speaking?
with me. We were playing, I forgot what video game we were playing, but I remember it clear as day. We're like sitting in his room, we're playing video games. And I want to say it was sometime a driving multiplayer game, and we're like racing each other. And then I see his screen, the car is not moving. Look over there, and he's just slumped.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, it's late at night, so I like chalked. I didn't know what it looked like,
Right.
so I chalked it up. I'm like, okay, maybe he's tired, maybe take a Percocet or something. Who knows, right? And I was like, hey, and he would wake up and he would go right back to gaming. And I'm like, okay, this is odd. But once again, because my brother told me like after his friend passed away, like he would never get involved in that stuff. And I'm like, okay. So my mind never really went to that. Never really went to that. And then my mom came to me in, I want to say it was January, February 2005. And she came to me and she's like, we're going to go pick your brother up. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, we're going to go take him to inpatient. We're going to go take him to rehab. I was like, rehab? And she's like, your brother has been doing heroin.
How did she find out?
I'm not even sure. And I haven't even asked my mom. I haven't asked my mom how she found out. I think it was my dad who found his kid, I want to say.
Because he was living with your dad.
Yep. And reached out to my mom. And because my dad, like I said, he had his battles with alcoholism. And my dad reached out to my mom and was like, hey, this is a problem. This is out of my control now. I need your help. And of course, any parent will do, especially when they're in a tumultuous relationship. She finger pointed and blamed my dad for it, but nobody was really to blame. And so we picked him up. My mom picked him up because I didn't go with her. She picked him up. We took him to a rehab program, and he started doing outpatient rehab. And so that day he went in, and I was with her when we went and picked him up, and he was in detox, and he looked like absolute shit.
So Emily, did your dad take him in and then you guys picked him up, or like how did it go? Because I think sometimes people are curious
Yeah.
about the process, or if they have a
My
sibling or
yeah, my
loved one that's struggling with it.
yeah.
What happened? Did he overdose at this point, or was he using, and your dad was
He
like,
was
come get him? Tell us the process if you don't mind sharing that.
and I'll tell it as much as I know.
Yeah.
So to my knowledge of how it happened was that my dad found some type of something in my brother's room because my dad was pretty respectful of my brother's space, but I think he tried to go wake him up for work one day and he just wasn't. He just looked fucked up. And so my dad did some digging around his room and found my brother's injection kit and heroin, and then basically told him like, you're not going nowhere. Called my mom and they took him to an outpatient program, like the first one he could find, because my dad was actually in an effort to try and help my brother, because I mean it was pretty well known that my brother was, using drugs of some variety and smoking weed, whatever. And my dad wanted to try to set a good example and especially get on good terms with my mom. So my dad enrolled in AA. So my dad
Good
was
for
in
him.
yeah, he was in AA at the time, and there was no alcohol in the house. He was trying to be on the right thing. So I'm pretty sure my dad called his AA sponsor and they got him into the program.
Got it.
Yeah. But then that afternoon, when they went to go pick him up, my mom went to go pick him up because he needed a ride. Picked him up. I was with my mom because I wanted to see him and because I was pissed at him. I was like, you said you were never going to do this. Excuse my language. But I was like, you promised me. You promised me.
Of course you felt that way.
I was like, we're supposed to be like best friends and you promised me. And so I was cheated. I was like, I was really pissed off. And I
Right,
was,
that's why I'm
yeah,
glad you're being so open and sharing that, because I think that's a normal sibling reaction when
yeah.
you have such.
And I was like, you told me, like, after his friend died, I'm like, you told me you would never do that. And you're doing it. But then I saw him and I was like, my God, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell him about himself because he literally looks like he's in misery. And so my mom, we went to the grocery store and my brother was just in such misery. My mom went into the grocery store to go grab something, and I think he asked her to go get him Tylenol because that's all he could have. My mom wasn't trying to give him Tylenol. She's like, no. And he, like, his now finding out he had the suicide incident not too long before that I didn't
Oh
know
god,
about
yeah,
that.
and so that was
Yeah.
probably super confusing for you at the time.
Yeah.
You're like,
I was
Mom,
like,
it's
my mom's like,
Tylenol.
no. Like, she, like, looked at him. She's like, no, you're not getting anything. He's like, I told you they said I could have it. And she's like, fine. So she, like, went to the store. So we're in the car talking, and he apologized. And he's like, I'm so sorry. He's like, but you just don't understand. He's one day you'll understand. And I'm like, okay. He's like, but don't ever do this. He's like, use drugs all you want. I'm not condoning anyone to use drugs, but he's like, but just never touch this stuff.
Yeah, and I don't even know if he really meant it that way. He was just trying to bring, I think,
Yeah,
some gravity and depth to how dangerous going to this level of drugs is,
right.
right?
Yeah, and he was just like, because I don't know how to get out of it.
Right.
And he's like, I don't know how to get out of it. And I was like, okay. I was like, you broke a promise to me, so you have to promise me that you're gonna like go through this rehab and you're done, like, type of thing. And he was like, I got you. So he went through the rehab program. With flying colors. Came out, was clean, finished out his senior year of high school, graduated, walked the stage. He rolled into the summer and he was working. He had just got a job, just got enrolled in college, and life was kind of good. Everything was fine. And then roll into the humble, and I'll never forget it. You talk a lot about you getting the call, and I'll never forget that morning. So I chuckle about it now because it's crazy how it happened. So that night, believe it or not, I had where my mom and I stayed at was on a busy road, and like that night of like midnight, I got woken up by like some crazy horns on the road. Went back to sleep. About 5 a.m., my mom comes. I heard my house phone ring. I'm like, wait a minute, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm not getting up to answer the house phone, right? I could hear my mom answer it, and I could hear her answer it. Oh yeah, I'm still asleep. And then my mom comes busting in my room. I'm talking about like, busting in her. I've never heard like this before. She's like, get up. And I was like, why? I'm like, for what? It's Saturday. I'm like, why? And she's like, your brother's dead. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay. I was like, my mom has an ear for dramatics sometimes. I'm like, okay. Like, I'm like, what do you mean, Dad? She's like, get your clothes on and let's go.
At your age, you may have been thinking, oh, I'm going to go kill your brother. He just pissed me off.
That's
like, and you're half asleep, right? You're not thinking literally my brother.
Or like my brother did. She was like, oh, your brother's dead because I haven't heard from him in 2 days.
Right.
Yeah, so I was like, okay. But so I threw some clothes on real quick and then we get in the car went silent. And I'm like, okay. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, was she not playing? And it was like, it felt like the longest car ride of my life. And I'm like thinking in my head, I'm like, mom's being dramatic. And we come around the corner to where my dad lived. And my dad's apartment was above this little corner store. Come around the corner and I see an ambulance right there. And I'm like, and it doesn't have lights on. And I'm like, okay. I was like, okay, what's going on? And so then we walk up to my dad's apartment and come to the door. And my dad's sitting there. And my mom beelines to my brother's room. And my mom just screams. And I'm like, oh my God, it really happened.
That was the moment when you were like,
I was like,
this is real.
And my dad's, he's just staring at me. And I'm like, I'm like, looking at him and he's just nodding his head. And I'm like, oh my God. I just go and I sit down on the couch and I'm like, everything is going to change now. I remember literally saying that out loud. I'm like, everything is about to change.
Oh, you're giving me chills because how many of us have said that? I shared that on the show too. I knew everything was going to change. And Emily, how old were you here? Because your brother's what, 18, 19?
Yeah, he was 18.
Yeah.
I was 13. Yeah, so I was 13 years old.
Baby, yeah.
And so I'm sitting on the couch in my father's living room, which has a direct sight line to my brother's room. And I'm just staring at my mom, like, literally just sitting on the floor, screaming, crying. And the paramedics close the door to the room. And I'm just like, there's cops coming in and paramedics coming in. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, what just happened? My dad's sitting because my dad had a 1-bedroom apartment. So he gave my brother the bedroom. So my dad's bed was, there's a really big apartment for being a 1-bedroom. And so my dad had this like kind of living area. So he like pulled like the little wall back where his living area was. And he's just sitting on his bed. And I like look at him and I was like, I went to wake him up from work and he was on the couch and I went to shake his shoulder and he was cold. And I turned him over and he's like, when I turned him over, the needle fell and I could see the foam in his mouth. And I was like, fuck.
And your father saw all of that.
My dad saw all of it. And I just sat there. That's all I remember really from the day is like sitting there. I think I might have spoke with a detective who was like asking me if he knew where my brother got drugs from. Something very insensitive at the time, and I was just like,
isn't it crazy the questions they ask you? I know.
He's like, you know who your brother used to get high with? And I'm like, who? And I'm 13. Right. And I'm like, no, I didn't know who my brother used to get high with. If I did know who my brother used to get high with, I'm definitely not about to answer you.
Mm-hmm. Do you think I can even formulate a sentence anyway right now? Right. But I would not tell you that. Like, I'm a 13-year-old trying to protect my brother. I don't even know if this is real. Give me a break. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And then my parents had stepped out at one point, and like I remember sitting there, and I'm like, do I go in the room? And like, do I see him? And I'm like, no, you can't do that. Like, you're gonna be scarred for life. I already was scarred for life, but I'm like, no, you don't want to see that image. But I sat there and contemplated it for a while because I'm like he's gone, and I like wanted to see it with my own eyes, but I never really mustered it up to go and see him. I'm glad I didn't. Looking back,
I was just gonna ask you that question. I was like, what are your thoughts now? Literally 18 years later, when we're having this conversation, which is wild. You're glad you didn't. Yeah.
Because the image that I have of my brother in my head isn't tainted. And I didn't see him at that moment. I'm glad I didn't. But yeah. So like came back in the room, and the rest of the day is just, I don't know how it transpired. Somebody came and picked me up. I don't know. I can't remember who came and picked me up. But I think it's one of my brother's friends or a family friend came and picked me up. And it was like the first football game of the season for the high school. And like we went to the football game. And yeah, and like,
why do you think your parents had that happen? Do you think they wanted to normalize your day a little bit? Why do you think?
I think so. And then like I also too had a lot of like, I was so in like shock. I do remember like somebody coming and picking me up, and then me and be like, I just want to go to the football game. Like I just want to go be a normal kid. Like, because what the fuck just happened? Like I was so in shock, and I didn't know what shock was yet, that I was like, I just want to go to the football game. And I had made a couple calls before that to a couple people, a couple friends of mine, broke the news, and it was like people were like, "No, you're fucking playing." And I'm like, "No, I'm not playing. I'm not playing at all." And people were like crying and screaming about it. And then the word got out, and I went to the football game. They're like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I'm at the football game, man. I don't know what else y'all want me to do. Like, I don't know what to do." And people are like, "This is crazy. Like, your brother really is gone." I'm like, "Yeah, 1000% he's gone." And I desired so much like to be normal that day. And so I went to the football game with a close family friend of mine, which I wish I remembered who the hell it was. And like, if they're listening to this right now, thank you. Thank
I
you
was
for
going to say
taking that.
thank you. Thank you
Thank
to
you.
them, because that was, I don't think necessarily a bad thing for you at all.
No, thank you to whoever took me to that game and just allowed me to attempt to wrap my head around things. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then so my parents had who really plans for a child to die. My parents had no financial planning for this in no way. My parents, we didn't have means by any manner at all. So my grandparents were willing to pay for the funeral and the expenses and everything. That night, came back from hanging out, like trying to get my mind off crap. Come back to my mom's house. My mom's, yeah, we're going up to Wisconsin like tomorrow. So my grandparents lived in Wisconsin. So which is like where we were at. It's only like an hour and a half. So it's not too bad. It's like the equivalency, like where you're at of going to like Augusta. Like it's not that bad. And we're gonna have the funeral up there. Your grandparents are paying for stuff. And my mom's a wreck at this point. My mom's a fucking wreck. She's in shambles. And so her cousin sent a car for us, a limousine, to go take us up to my grandparents' house. But I remember telling her, I was like, we're going up there to bury him in Wisconsin. I was like, so he's going to be buried in Wisconsin? She's like, yeah. I'm like, that's not what he wants. I'm like, why are we doing that? Like,
what did you feel like you wanted?
Definitely not to be buried in the family plot next to
I'm like, I feel like even if our siblings don't tell us, we know, like,
I for sure knew that,
you know?
like, my brother wanted to be cremated. Like, my brother was a hippie. Like, he
Mine
wanted,
too, which is why he's cremated.
Like, and my brother wanted to be cremated, but he wanted to go out like John Morrison. Like, he wanted like funeral pyre, cremated, like with a nice little monument somewhere that was like, this is me. Don't cry now, like type of thing. And I was like, so that's where we're gonna have funeral. I'm like, what about the people that want to come and see him? She's like, they can make it. And I was like, all right. So we get in this car and we're going up to Wisconsin. And like we're about to get in this car, and I asked my mom, I'm like, how long are we gonna be up there? And she's, I don't know. I'm like, school's starting. I'm like, my 8th grade year is about to start. I'm like, I want to go to school, Mom. And I wanted so bad to normalize. I didn't want to deal. I did not want to accept the fact that my brother was gone. Right. I was like, Mom, I want to go to school. Like, I remember like right before getting in the car, I'm like, I don't want to go up here. Like, I want to go to school. And she's like, you're coming and that's final. And I was like, how much school am I missing? I'm like, I didn't give a crap about school up until this point.
But it's what you knew, right? And so there's like a normalcy to that and like a routine to that. And I think that's one of the really important parts of this part of your story is that I do think kids really crave routine, normalcy in general. And like we rebel against it. But then once we have something traumatic happen to us or like divorce, which you have gone through, and now you've lost your brother to an overdose, like you are craving the normal day to day. Get me into school at 8 a.m. Give me that school lunch.
I don't even like school.
Right.
I'm like, I wanted so bad just to not, like exactly what you said, the normalcy, and I just wanted so bad to just, the normalcy.
Kids don't want to feel different. That's just the thing. You don't want to feel different. And pulling
I didn't want to
kid out
be
of
the
school,
kid coming back 3 weeks later. Hey guys, sorry I wasn't here. My brother died, by the way, if you didn't know.
We want to be normal, like we want to fit in. It's very different than when you evolve into yourself. Once you get later in high school and college, then you're, it's okay to be myself. And no, you need normalcy, you need routine, and you want to quote unquote fit in. And that was, you weren't going to fit in anymore. No. That was different.
Yeah, like I said, like everything is different now. Everything is going to be different. And I kicked, I screamed, I moaned, and I got my ass in that car, and I was on the way.
You didn't have much choice at 13, I'm sure.
I didn't at all. And like my mom, like she had cut her hair before you know how when you're in manic mode, you like, I'm changing my hair color, my hair.
That's so weird. My mom did the same thing. Like she didn't go crazy different, but she had to have her hair cut and like
my mom had like nice like long hair, like she had like long hair, and she like fucking pixie cut.
Interesting.
I was like, okay. And like now looking back at it, I'm like, my mom was not okay. Like, of course, nobody's okay when you lose a child, but I'm like, my mom was on the edge. Like, my mom was not okay. And we get in this car, we go up to my grandparents' house, and my grandparents are out there. And I had never seen my grandfather cry. My grandfather he was like one of the hardest of asses, everything. And he's standing there, just looks like he's been crying for 4 hours. And I was like, looked at that, and I was like, oh God, this is intense.
Yeah.
And to get out, and we're up there, and the whole time I'm up there, I'm making phone calls to various people because this is before social media. This is before we had text messaging and stuff.
Yeah.
I've texted some of my brother's friends, but I really wanted to get the word out because I knew how important it was to them. My brother had a lot of impact on a lot of people. And so I'm calling people, and just to give a little semblance of routine, because I'm just sitting up in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, with 6 channels on the TV, a CD player, and barely any cell reception. And so I'm going crazy up there. And then the whole time I'm like asking my mom, like, when is the funeral? When am I going back to school? When is this happening? I'm tired of sitting here, Mom. I'm tired of being over here. Like, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends. I want to go be a 13-year-old, 13, 14-year-old.
Right.
And she's unfortunately, it's not anything that I can control right now because your grandparents are paying for it. And I'm like, all right.
Was your father there as well during this?
No, so my father was not there. I'm not really sure where my father was, but my grandparents and my father did not have a good relationship. They tolerated my dad, but there was a lot of blaming of my dad too. When he was after this, my dad came up, I want to say 2 or 3 days before the actual funeral.
Okay.
He didn't stay there. I believe my aunt helped him pay for a hotel room up there, but my dad wasn't involved in any planning. I wasn't involved in any planning either. It was my grandparents are paying for it, and I'm not sure really. I couldn't tell you what the planning decisions were made, but it was all there. It was going to be at my grandparents' church, and he was going to be buried in the family plot at Milton Lawn Cemetery, and that was that. That was it. It came time for the funeral, and I'm talking about my grandparents lived in a pretty middle of nowhere town. They went to church in an even smaller middle of nowhere town. And I want to say, and don't quote me on this, but I want to say I had been putting word of mouth out for a long time and sending text messages, calling people and everything because I wanted people to be able to attend. And,
doing as much as a 13-year-old can do with TV.
And then my mom they put out his obituary, and they gave the funeral arrangements in the obituary, and my mom posted it in the local paper. and the high school distributed it and put the funeral arrangements out, and like a lot of really good people put it out, and they're like, it's far, but if you can make it. And I want to say about 600 people showed up to my brother's funeral.
Wow.
So, like, I'm talking about, like, the church had a capacity of 200.
People were outside.
There were people in the foyer, and the pastor was, like, scrambling because he's like, I had no idea this many people were coming. But don't quote me on that. And somebody's probably going to listen to it. They're like, it wasn't 600. There were
But it's
600.
also perspective of a 13-year-old, and you
Yeah.
knew the capacity of the church, and regardless, it extended past the capacity of the church. Those are the facts. That's a lot, and that's a lot of people to show up.
And
to drive. Yeah, and
it
that's
was a
huge.
lot, and to drive there, and it's in the middle of nowhere, and they really came. It was a testament to my brother, 1000%. And it made me feel a lot better, especially.
You felt like you had something to do with it then.
Yeah, I had something to do with it. And then everything that wasn't in my control, or stuff that I knew, that my brother was buried in a suit. For my brother had never, I think my brother wore a suit like twice in his life.
Yeah, that was not Peter.
Peter.
Yeah.
And like, my brother had very long hair at the time, and he had this full beard. And like, I remember staring at my brother in the casket. I'm like, man, they really did you up how you didn't want to get did up, man. And my dad was like, because I told you my dad was a jokester and a big old kid, he wouldn't have picked a suit. That's what my dad said. I was like, yeah. I was like, he put his hand on my shoulder. He's like, just get through it. And so, beautiful ceremony, and all those people came, and they came and actually watched his interment and everything, and followed from the small little town where my grandparents' church was down to where the plot was. And even more people ended up showing up then, because, like I said, church was like, yo, we're at capacity. Like, we're going to get shut down by the fire marshal.
Right, so people followed you to the...
Yeah, so people were out there that weren't able to come for the actual viewing and the ceremony. Like, people were out there waiting for the funeral procession to happen. And, yeah. So they came out and came to the actual funeral procession and watched him get interned. And, like, I remember looking at my mom, and I was like, Ma, you do realize that we have to have a celebration of life. And we had talked about it before. And I was like, we got to do this. This is bigger than us. My mom's just little, like, north-south acknowledgement on it. And we had grown up we had some pretty good faith pastors growing up in our local church. Me and my brother's faith journey was a little bit different. But we ended up having a celebration for life for him, too, in our town that we were at. And I spoke at that, and that was, like, probably one of the hardest things I'd ever do. But it was just so
Now, would you do that again? We got to ask you that question, too. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah. I would do it 1,000%.
So, yes. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, it's so personal doing the eulogy or speaking at the celebration of life or whatever. And some siblings, some of you guys are like, I can't do it. Trust your gut. If you feel like you can't do it, that's fine. But if you do it and you speak, you will never regret it. That's why I wanted to ask you, because I've never
regretted it. And I came up with the gut understanding with love. My brother was a huge impact on so many people's lives for the short time he was here on this earth. And I didn't feel a burden or like you got to do this, but at the same time I did. And I took the torch from him, and it was like, he was such a great person that, like, I'd have to live that out for him now. Live a little vicariously through his image and translate that back onto the world and be the voice he couldn't be and do all the things that he couldn't do necessarily, and speaking and just like how you do, and saying his story and helping those people that have opioid addiction, realizing that I believe there's a statistic out there, and don't quote me on this and don't cite me on this, but about 60% of people that use opioids have some type of mental health problem that is undiagnosed.
Oh my gosh, I would be shocked if that's not accurate, if not higher. Yeah. Definitely.
But
you're self-medicating for sure. Yeah.
And that's so important. And I do a lot of work now with a lot of different, like, veterans initiatives through the VA and through the VFW, because there are a lot of veterans out there that are, instead of seeking the treatment they need to, using opioids instead. And me as a veteran,
they can't always get the treatment that they need, which is a whole other podcast episode. But so they self-medicate, to your point.
And it's just, that's not the way. And throughout, I had, post my brother dying, me actually getting back to school, I had an amazing, because like I said, like, everyone knew my brother. Everybody knew my brother. It was ridiculous. Like, to the extent, like, how many people know my brother is ridiculous. And I still get messages to this day. Hey, you don't know me, I know you. And I'm like, okay, what's up?
Isn't that crazy? I know. I
Yeah,
feel like you're one of the only people, not the only people, I'm sure you guys
yeah,
get this too, but I get messages too, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know who you are, but okay, cool. Thanks
right,
for loving my brother too. Yeah.
right.
It's actually really cool.
Yeah,
As long
and
as people are sensitive, I will put this out there. Sometimes people will make it a little too much about themselves, and that's why it's not cool.
yeah,
But I can also understand because they feel like they lost someone too. So I think that's just a little piece of advice from Emily and I would
yeah,
say is make sure that you're very aware that this is our sibling and our families. Yes, you may have had a relationship
yeah,
with them, but
yeah,
just be mindful of that. That's my disclaimer there. But yes, it is a
yeah,
beautiful thing. It makes me realize how many lives my Andreas touched, and I'm sure for you with
yeah.
Peter. Yeah.
And it's just like it was like popping back to that too. Like when we saying like my dad was such a huge kid and stuff. Like when we were at the funeral, you know how like you can't like you gotta stand there and be like worldly and be like here to shake people's hands and like hug
Yeah.
people. There was like a random. I'm sure she had an affiliation with my brother, but I didn't know her and like my dad didn't know her and nobody knew her. Like she was just there, like hugging people. And my dad's, "Do you think she's a funeral crasher?" Or I was like, "Dad, I don't know." I was like, "I have no idea." But she knew him. I had no idea who she was,
Right.
and she was just there hugging people. And I'm like, "Hey, who knows?" But
Oh, that's funny. Oh my
yeah,
God.
my dad was like, "Do you know her?" I'm like, "I don't know her." Yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
"You think she's a funeral crasher?" I'm like, "I don't know, Dad."
Gosh.
Like, I don't know.
That just
Yeah,
reminds me of that movie Wedding Crashers, and
yeah,
he's what is it, Will Ferrell's moved on to
yeah,
funerals now instead.
yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah.
That's too funny. Yeah, your dad sounds like a trip. Oh my
Yeah, but
gosh.
that was a super trip. Everything was like so meticulously with that whole funeral. It was like nothing about it was my brother. And
Mhm.
like when we were planning it, they were like, "What music do you think your brother would want from the hymn book?" And I'm like,
You're like, not from the hymn book.
so I got like the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It's like the most, and like, sorry, mom, if you're listening to that. That was a joke.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was a pure joke that I
Mhm.
knew Peter would want. The
Mhm.
most left song in the hymn book, the craziest song in it. It was like the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I was like, that. And so we got that to play.
You
But
get
yeah,
this from your dad for
yeah.
sure. You
Oh,
definitely
yeah.
get this from your dad.
We're a bunch of pranksters, man. Like, I'm a big kid. Like, I definitely get it from my dad. Me and my dad are
Yeah.
7 days apart. But
Oh, that's
yeah.
so funny.
But so going back into school and stuff, I had an amazing support system. Thank God, because I don't know how I was gonna be able to cope with it. My school basically was like, if you need to go at any time, you want to go talk to the counselor, you just knock on her door and she's gonna stop everything she's doing and she's gonna talk to you.
That's amazing. I don't think that happens enough. I think your story is amazing, and I hope that it
Yeah.
brings more awareness to that because a child losing anyone is confusing. It's difficult. This is extremely difficult. And it's when we talk about stories with people with work and missing work, there's zero understanding. I've heard a lot of stories where there's not that much understanding at school either.
Yeah.
So to hear such a positive experience, I hope that people hear this and
Yeah.
learn from it and take that and run with it because you can want to go back to the normalcy. You can want to go back to the daily routine of going to school, going to your breaks, going to going to gym, going to your favorite
Yeah.
classes or whatever they were, seeing your friends. But there's going to be some days where you're like, oh man, I really don't want to be here. This is like, how is my life even real? And those are the days where you
Yeah.
really need that support and you need to be able to go knock on that counselor's door or just leave. You can't be
Yeah.
there. And that's
Yeah.
important.
And the school
Yeah.
was like super, super supportive of, me coming back. I think I had missed like 3 weeks or something like that. Me coming back, and they're like, "Don't even worry about catching up on anything." Most of my teachers were. They're like, "Just don't worry about it. Like, just pick up where we're at. If you have no idea what we're talking about, like, it's gonna be okay." I finished out that year, and then I rolled into freshman year, and I went from being, like I said, I went from being a kid with a sibling to an only child
Yep.
in the matter of a snap. And like I said before, like my brother was not the greatest academically, and I wasn't the greatest academically either, and I was skating by for a long time with a lot of crap that I was doing, and now all of a sudden the magnifying glasses were on me. You're right. Hence, the magnifying glasses were on me, and I was not used to it, and I pushed back so hard. It was ridiculous. My mom was also too trying to navigate the loss of a child and now having to like hold it together for another child.
Right.
My dad wasn't doing good at all. He was having problems relapsing with his alcoholism left and right.
I was gonna ask you about that because
Yeah,
not that I talk about this out here all the time. Everyone does. I don't think it matters. Diminishing grief is not a thing. It's not the way to go. All
yeah,
loss is very difficult. But for him struggling with his addiction and then also finding your son like that
yeah,
can probably create a lot of opportunity to unfortunately relapse.
yeah.
So I'm sure that's what he struggled with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and my dad was like putting something back, like I want to say like a 24 pack back a day, and
That's a lot.
it's a
Yeah.
lot. And he wasn't really holding the job down. He ended up
Mhm.
moving in with his sponsor at the time, and my mom,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
my dad moved in with his sponsor probably my sophomore year of high school, and my mom didn't like that. She didn't know him, so I wasn't going over there a lot.
Mhm.
And my dad felt a lot of guilt from my
Mm.
brother's passing because it was under his watch. And I'm not sure the conversations that were had between my dad and my mom, but I'm sure there was some hurtful words there. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I'm quite sure.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's understandable. And like I said, my parents, always didn't see eye to eye in their parenting styles to begin with.
Right.
But like, and
Only exasperate
yeah,
that, I'm quite sure.
yeah, I hate to say that my mom, but I know for sure said it, but the writing was on the wall, that one.
Mhm.
And my brother's good friend, who we grew up with, his mom reached out to me a few years ago. And I was always at her house growing up and stuff too. I love her to death. She reached out to me because there was like a little bit of falling out between her and my mom. She's
Mhm.
been a very motherly figure for me and her husband as well, like a fatherly figure. I talked with your dad about his addiction, and because she was a licensed therapist and talked with him and stuff. And I know your dad was hurting and everything. And but it brought me a lot of closure, her words. But yeah, so his addiction, unfortunately, was exacerbated by it, and he carried that guilt. And unfortunately, in 2016, he lost his battle to addiction as well,
Yeah.
and with heart failure. 2000, yeah, 2006, my fault. 2007 was when he passed away. 2007 was when my father passed away from heart failure.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So you had multi-loss, you had back-to-back losses, and
yep,
that's very
back to
challenging.
back loss,
Yeah.
and yeah, and
How has that left your relationship with you and your mom now?
so initially, because unfortunately I was the brunt of the phone call, believe it or not. So I had a cell phone in high school, and I had got a call on my cell phone while I was in class, and I like sent it to voicemail, but it was from the coroner's office. The voicemail was from the coroner's office. I'm like, okay, this got something to do with my brother. Sometimes they had called us to get like data and stuff, like data
Mhm.
collection about because the opioid crisis was starting to kick up in our county after that. You saw more and more deaths and
So
stuff.
yeah, and they wanted to
Yeah.
find the people that were distributing this. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So
Mhm.
I was like, oh, okay. So I get home from school, told my mom about it. I was like, can you call this number back? And my mom came in my room and she's like, I'll tell you something. I'm like, what's up? She's like, your father's dead. And like, she just walked out. And I was like, that's it? Like, that's all you got to say?
Mhm.
And I was like, and I freaked out. Like, I was already not having a good day. And I freaked out. I'm like, that's all you have to say? But it wasn't fair to her at the time. Because she definitely clapped back. And she told me, how do you think I feel? We were married for 20 years and he's gone too.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, okay, I got
Mhm.
you. But yeah, it was
But
after
that's still
that.
so hard. I'm glad you shared that, even though it's hard to share because that's so hard because the losses. And
Yeah,
so I think managing those conversations are difficult and we're not always going to say the right thing, whether it's us
right.
or our parents. But I
Mhm.
think it's about holding up a place in our heart at some point for understanding that we're just
Yeah.
doing the best that we can with these kinds of losses.
and
Difficult.
and my parents had always had a very two-parent approach to things. Like my mom was more in school, my dad was like sports and fun.
Hmm.
And so I was very heavily involved in sports at the time. And my dad, as much as he could try, like my dad, he attended like all my sports stuff. And so like at the time I was doing pretty decent in sports in high school. And so like my father's passed away and I lost the number one fan on the sideline. I'm like, because my mom never took an interest in that stuff.
Hmm.
And my senior year, I like begged and pleaded for my mother to attend my senior game. I was like, all I want to do is for you to attend one game. Like, I don't have dad here. Can you please come? And she mustered up the strength to come.
Hey, Mom, I'm so proud of you. That's good.
Yeah,
That's a
like,
good in
it took
that, yeah.
begging and pleading,
Mhm.
but
Do you think
our
maybe it was hard for her too
oh
because that
yeah,
was such a strong connection to both Peter and your father?
oh
I would assume so.
1000%.
But you can see that now because
Yeah,
it's, years have passed, you have more maturity. But so that's why I think your story, although
yeah,
extremely intense and so much loss,
yeah,
Emily, I'm so sorry for your losses.
yeah,
But I think it's one that's really healthy for especially teenagers to hear,
definitely.
because it's losing one person as a teenager is traumatic, but losing more than one person and also
Right,
understanding you're so focused on yourself as a teenager, and you're not selfish, you're not a narcissist,
right.
you're not a bad person. That's what you're
You're,
supposed to do. You're
you're a
a
teen.
kid.
You're a teenager. You're
You're a
supposed to
kid. That's the
be
most
like,
selfish time in
yeah,
your life, and you should be selfish.
right,
But I think this is such a helpful story because it can help you guys hear and say, "Oh my god,
yeah,
okay, like there are so many and I love that you share and now I know this and now I know this because there's so
yeah,
many complexities that happen that we just don't understand as kids, and our parents are doing the best that they can most of the time and are trying to shield us from things, and sometimes we needed to know more,
yeah,
sometimes we needed to know less, and I think just understanding that they're doing the best that they can, and if you want to know more,
yeah,
ask. And
definitely.
I think that's really important, and I'm so, like, what a, like, happy part of the story that your
Yeah,
mom came to the game,
yeah.
like.
She showed up, and as tumultuous as the time was,
Mhm.
navigating post my brother dying, post my father dying, and then navigating. I'm a teenager at that time too.
Yeah,
When my mother's navigating this as well, she's just lost her kid, and she just lost. Yeah, he might have been her ex-husband. My parents were together for 20 years.
it's a long time.
They were together for 20 years. That's a long time.
Mhm.
And as the father of her children,
Yeah.
and divorced or not. And
That's a
so
bond you have for life, like, yeah,
right.
it's a bond you have for life.
Come on. And I was going through the stages of grief like no other. I was angry at the world. I was angry at my mother. I thought my mother had everything to do with my brother's death. I thought my mom had everything to do with my father's death. Oh,
Right.
you, and especially too, I held it over my mom's head for a long time. It wasn't fair to her, but I wasn't able to see. I wanted to go see my father a couple of instances before that, but my dad hadn't paid my mom any child support,
Mhm.
or as far as I know. I don't know if it's a full story, but or she wasn't comfortable with me going to see my dad because of where he lived. But she was like, "No, you're not going over there. You're not going to your father's house. If he can't pick you up, I'm not taking you there." And my dad didn't have a car at the time. He didn't have a car at the time. She wasn't taking me over there. And I was like, "I want to go see my dad. Like, what's the problem with that?" And then I went on a retreat up to the Dells, the Wisconsin Dells. Before that, it was like Valentine's Day weekend. And I had called my dad, and I left him a voicemail, and I was like, "Hey dad, just want to say happy Valentine's Day. Like, when I get back, I really want to link up with you. Let's make it work." And I had missed my dad's phone call because it was like no cell reception up there. And he left me a voicemail, and he was like, "Just told me happy Valentine's Day," and like this on the third. And then that week, um, he was like, "Yeah, we'll definitely link up this weekend." And that week was when he passed away. And
Right.
so I was,
Of
I could,
course, of
I
course.
was
You're
like,
like, "Why did you keep him?" But, like, your mom, which I'm
yeah,
sure you realize now, your mom was doing what she thought was best for you.
of
Like,
course. And
and that's hard in the moment, though, because 'cause you're like, "How
yeah,
could you do this to me?"
I know.
Yeah.
And back to my mom had put me under a microscope after my brother passed away because she didn't want me to fall into the same things that my brother did.
Right.
And she was really watching who I hung out with and what I was doing. And then as a teenager, like that's the wrong thing to do to begin with.
Right.
Like I say all the time, like I could not make it as a
Mhm.
teenager today. I could not make it because if my mom knew where I was half the time, goodness
Mhm.
gracious. And I was really angry and stuff with my mom for a long time. And then my senior year came and she showed up for my soccer game, and I was over the moon about it. And then I made the decision. My brother had a stint after. So when 9/11 happened, my brother had a dream to join the military. Like my brother wanted to be like a like he wanted to be like the special forces operator ranger dude at the time
Mhm.
after 9/11. And my parents were like, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
My brother wanted to graduate high school, go to the military. They're like, absolutely not. They're like, that's not even an option. And they told him that from a long time. So my brother had put that in these, I'm never going to be able to do that. So he never did it. And some things weren't working out, like how I wanted to pursue like a career and stuff post high school. I wasn't good at school, so I knew I couldn't really do college. Like, I didn't make the grades. I didn't have the money. I didn't want to be in debt. So I just decided to join the military in an ambition to live out a dream of my brother's. So
Yeah,
I
you got
joined.
to honor Peter.
Yeah, so I joined the military and I did it for 12 years, and I just got out last year in May. And
Congratulations and thank you for your service, Emily.
thanks, I appreciate it. I got to do a
Yeah.
lot of cool stuff and meet a lot of really cool people, one of which includes my best friend who's chilling with me for a little bit up here in Charlotte working. I got to live through him in that way. And also, too, like, I think the best thing that ever happened to me was going into the military because I was able to seek the proper therapy I was to deal with
Oh, how
all of
interesting.
this. I joined the military and I had a little bit of behavior problems and stuff, and I had a good enough set of leadership who identified, they're like, hey, if you got behavior problems, you need to go take yourself to the therapist, and you need to go talk to the therapist.
What branch, Emily?
I was in the Army.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So I was in the Army, and so I was stationed in Germany at the time when it happened.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I got into a little bit of trouble because I had a mouth on me. So got in a little bit of trouble, and they were trying to give me like a little bit of reprimand. And one very wise fellow, my platoon sergeant at the time, he was like, no. He's like, she needs to go to behavioral health. That's where she needs to go because she's got shit going on. And they were like, okay. So they recommended me to behavioral health, and I started my therapy journey. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. Which not a lot of people in the military get to say that. Like, not a lot.
Yeah, I know. That's why I love that you're sharing this part of the story.
Right.
I have a brother-in-law in the Army, and
don't get me wrong, it was a struggle.
Yeah.
To get the proper coverage and medication and stuff, and therapists don't always fit. You don't always get the support of the people.
That's a huge one.
You.
Like, I always tell people, you've probably heard me say this, Emily, but if you guys haven't heard me say this, like, it's like therapy is like dating a lot of ways. Like, just because would you marry the person that you go on your first date with? I mean, if you do, you're lucky, but you're like the 0.0001%.
Right. And there's no shopping in the military. You get whoever the hell you get, and
that's why I'm like loving your story, because that's amazing that it was so transformational for you.
Yeah. So I was able to get a really good therapist off the jump that really helped me hone in on this, like, especially like my first couple of years in the military that I think were so crucial. And then figure out, like, wow, I actually have, a diagnosed ADHD. Like, wow, I've had ADHD my whole life.
It's very validating.
Yeah.
To be told, like, this is
relief.
What's going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, it's a relief. And, hey, here's some medication. And wow, like, not everything's solved, but there's a lot of clarity now.
You have tools to succeed in life. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm a firm believer of everything happens for a reason. And when I sat down on that couch in 2005 and I said, everything's going to change, everything changed. And I would have never guessed in 2005 where I thought I was going to be today. Never in a million years. But the journey that I was faced with and the unfortunateness of my brother's passing, but learning the lessons and taking the time to really evaluate who he was as a person and how he impacted so many people, and then taking those values and like really instilling them in myself and like trying to live through his image as much as I can to like live on his legacy and live with an air of how he wanted to live, but be my own person at the same time has been so impactful in my life.
But yeah, obviously. I mean, and I think I love what you're saying, but I also really think like Peter's spirit has carried on through you and through the things that you've done. And I'm so glad that you went into the military, and thank you again for your service.
Thanks.
And I really appreciate you being so thorough and sharing, because the opioid crisis is getting worse and worse. And of course, now we're rolling in fentanyl into all of this. And it's just, it's so horrific. And you're right. Like, when you lost Peter, this was really when it started to go into this really I don't want to say shoot up, because that's a pun intended there, but not really. No, it's horrible, but it's true.
It's true.
And it's spiked, and I wish it was getting better, but it's not. It's turning to other things like fentanyl, and that's why we want to bring awareness to it here. Again, thank you, Emily. Thank you for your service. Thank you for sharing Peter's story. people are going to want to connect with you, especially military people.
Yeah.
Where are you comfortable with people before I close this up? God, we could talk for another hour about this, but
Yeah, no, I'm like, that's why I was like trying to loop it in a little bit. I'm like, we have been talking, girl.
that's okay. No, this is all really good stuff. Where are you super active? Tell us where we can find you.
So I am in the Facebook group. Please hit me up
Awesome.
on that. I am also on LinkedIn. If you guys want to connect professionally, please look me up. I'm searchable first name, last name through LinkedIn. I'm super lame and don't have an Instagram, and I have a TikTok, but I don't post.
That's fine. If you're in a group, that's even more perfect.
Yeah.
So we'll
I'm
make
in
sure
the
to
group.
include that in the show notes because I'm sure people will want to reach out to you because you have a
Yeah.
very unique story in general, but also with going into the military and the positive influence it's had on your life. And so thank you so much for sharing today,
Of
Emily. It's
course.
been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it, and I just want to give you a quick shout out because this is such like when we were communicating back and forth before this, I was like, I'm like, I had no idea this even existed until my best friend was like, you need to go on this podcast, and she's the one that
You have
connected
a good
us to.
friend.
Yeah, she's the one that connected us to each other, and she's like, you have to do this. She's like, you'd be a perfect fit, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. I'm like, let's
And here
do it.
you are.
And I'm like, I had no idea this type of stuff existed.
I couldn't find it myself, so if I can't find something, I create it. And here we are. And now I've met so many incredible people like you that are out here and we're doing things for our brothers and our sisters that have passed. And I think I'm just excited to see where this continues to go to help people. So yeah.
For sure.
Thank you, Emily. Big hug. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Maya.
Thank you guys so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast.